Welcome to The Truth as We Know It. This is July the 7th, 2022, and we're here for our weekly discussion of what we hope are some interesting topics. I'm joined tonight by Paul Moffett, by Stanley Hitron, and by Dave Vislisel.
Today we begin our discussion of the book How the South Won the Civil War, Oligarchy, Democracy, and the Continuing Fight for the American Soul by Heather Cox Richardson. Heather Cox Richardson is an American historian and professor of history at Boston College, where she teaches courses on the American Civil War, the Reconstruction era, the American West, and the Plains Indians. She previously taught at MIT and at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Richardson has authored 6 books on history and politics. Most recently, Richardson has started publishing Letters from an American, a nightly newsletter that chronicles current events in the larger context of American history.
One of the things that Richardson talks about in this book is the use of language. And I'm intrigued by that because I think that liberals have fallen way behind. We've been outfoxed by the right in terms of control of the language. And so what I see Richardson developing in this thesis, and she reinforces that in some of the commentary that I've watched on her interviews, is that the language of the debate is extremely important. And I have the feeling that most liberals hear things like, she's really something. We said, that's silly. Nobody would believe that. Nobody would buy that, but they do. And my contention would be that we need to take advantage of that, and we need to be as devious and as disingenuous as the right is if we're going to win over those people in the middle. We may all see through, this distortion in the etymology, but that's not the point. Yeah, we're selling this to someone else. So anyway, that was a take in the beginning, but. Stan, why don't I start with you on a more serious note of the discussion of this? What attracted you to the book, and what's the principal main idea that you have gleaned from it?
Well, I read the first chapter. I didn't read the conclusion, and there she lays out her story. Language. Part of language is crafting a story. This is the story. This is the way it is, the truth, as we know it, and then you will know it. And the story she tells is that there have been basically America is based on a paradox. We're a land espousing freedom, but we enslave people, and the people that are in charge are, then there's been 2 instances of where the oligarchs, she uses the term oligarchy, the oligarchs have taken control, and one is, I've tried to take control, and one is before the Civil War, which led to the Civil War. The second one is the movement conservatives. Anyway, and it's interesting, I'm interested, as a person, student of literature, I'm interested in the idea of myth and the impact of myth on people's thinking. And there's the myth of the yeoman farmer, which was Jeffersonian democracy, and then there's the myth of the cowboy, which is the movement conservatives, which is self-reliance, rugged individualism, that whole business. And I was a little frustrated with the first chapter. I know it's an introduction. I was a little frustrated with that because I understand what she was saying, understand her story, but I didn't see a lot of support for it. And I guess that is developed in the course of the book. But there was a lot of generalizations. The only time she went into the specifics was with the Powder River Wars in the West, and where the federal government came in support of the oligarchs, the big cattle ranchers. They were doing everything imaginable to stamp out the little guy, and Harrison came in and basically supported the big guys and against the little guys. And I guess the thing that really baffles me is, why do people buy this? maybe it's like you say, maybe it's the language, maybe it's the way it's expressed, but why does the little guy, why does the common man buy this idea that by giving more equity to people, you are destroying people's freedom? That's the paradox. It makes no sense at all. I question her. I don't know. I question her assumption or her thesis that the Civil War was the North was rising up against the oligarchs. I don't know if she develops that or provides evidence for that in the course of the book. But from what I've read, when Jill Lepore's History of America, it's like it wasn't a lot to do with the oligarchy of the South. And what about the oligarchy of the North? I mean, the North was a growing industrial. I mean, the railroads were growing, and manufacturing was growing, and there were plenty of oligarchs there, who relied on the government to support their interests and fuck everyone else. And anyway, so I think there's some questions here. But one other thing I want to say is that the whole division between in the beginning it was the Federalists versus the Jeffersonian democracy, and Jefferson's vision of the country was a bunch of yeoman farmers who were rugged individualists and provided for themselves and didn't need government, but had the power and the wisdom to decide on how to be ruled. Whereas the Federalists said, no, we have too much democracy. We can't trust all these yo-hos. We have to leave it to the elite. And it's interesting. I heard a podcast, and they were interviewing this historian who's, I forget his name, but he's written a lot about the early American founding of the country and all that stuff. And he said during the time of the Constitutional Convention, the word was there's too much democracy, and we've got to put some controls on this. We can't have all these yo-hos, voting and take. We need to leave it to the elite, to the wise, to the educated, to the landed people, who seem to have more capacity for making serious decisions about.
Perhaps their observation was the same as yours, that why do these people buy this stuff? Well, that makes them unfit for democracy. You've been through the first part of this. What's your take on the basic premise that Stan was talking about?
I mean, this is basically it. It was the fight between the people who have all the money and then the people who have some of the money versus the guys who got no money. And so, that which has been going on and on and on. And for me, I just see it like, here it is again, here it is in the beginning, and here it is in 1812, and here it is in the mid 19th century, and here it is prior to the Civil War. And the Civil War did it. I mean, it was over and over and over and over and over and over. The same thing happens. And it's happening again. We look at it and we say, well, there it is, Koch brothers and all those guys, the guys with all the money, they're just buying their way in. And, so what do you do about it? That's how I think about it. What do you do about it? Because, they got all the money. And they're in a, folks who really, they're really the oligarchs. I really like that. To see that expression there was like, yes. That's exactly where it is. We were no different from the Russians and the Chinese and all those people in terms of who's got the money.
Yeah, there's something in that old song: "The rich get rich and the poor get poorer." But ain't we got fun?
Yeah.
And we, and that's a great. I think one of the problems with our politics today is too many people are distracted by the technology and the internet and stuff, and they're not engaged. Are they getting distorted views? And it's hard to take responsibility for how you fashion the way you live and how you create your polity. But people just aren't engaged. They have too many other things like TikTok or whatever.
Or-
I just got a notice from TikTok. I don't even subscribe to TikTok. I don't know why. Anyway, I'm distracted.
Yeah, Dave, you said you haven't been through the text on this, but I think the discussion is a very familiar one. As Paul was saying, this happens over and over and over again. So what Richardson is introducing here is really not anything new, but she has done it in a way that points it in a very specific direction. I think perhaps that, that's one of the problems, Stan, and what you were pointing out. Why don't people understand it is because they're not educated, because in schools, we don't want to teach this kind of thing. We don't want to, we got upset over critical race theory. So we don't want to have anything controversial in school. So we can't say anything bad about what America has ever done. We've always.
So that impulse comes from the oligarchs. It comes from the people in power.
Sure.
They manipulate people to think like these cultural issues are more important than the truth.
Yeah. Dave, what's your take there? You've been listening to this.
I've been listening, yes, and I was totally unfamiliar with the book, of course. But I was telling Michael earlier, what I am more familiar with from a long time ago, last course I took in my English education master's at the University of Iowa, was there was a visiting professor from the South, and I took his course just before I left for Vista and came to, after Baltimore inner city training, came to Louisville, and that changed my life here. It's a book called, and he focused on a book called, he was a Southern professor, grew up in the South and was educated there. And you may have heard of 12 Southerners, I'll take my stand. And I was thinking, Stan, particularly you may have heard of them because it was 12 in the 1930s, the Depression is on. There are 12 Vanderbilt intellectuals who were called the fugitive, agrarian folks who wanted to look at, they were romanticizing about the Old South. And you can figure out as I talk here how this might fit in with what Heather Richardson's talking about here, because some of what you say sounds like it dovetails almost perfectly. There are a number of poets in that group, a guy named John Davidson, John Crow Ransom, I know, Stan, you're familiar with, heard of, and maybe read some of, Alan Tate, and I think there was one other that were poets. And then there was the Kentuckian, Robert Penn Warren was one. But there were a group of, they were intellectuals, they were sociologists, they were historians. And what they were doing in this fugitive thing is saying, what's wrong is, it's like the Civil War. The reason we seceded from the Union, the reason we left, the reason we rebelled was we were angry at and frustrated with the modernism, industrialism of the North. And we saw that, as especially it went on, you know, the George Babbitts at the desk, you know, the clerks counting the hours until the clock chimes and it's time to go home, and how, you know, it was dirty, it was pollution filled and so on, the Industrial Revolution in the North. Here are these guys and they're being overwhelmed. So it wasn't about slavery. These guys pretty much say, although being intellectuals, they've got their nuances. Well, it was kind of a combination, but you know, this racism and Southernism and white patriarchal kind of stuff, which is what this country was founded on, as you guys were saying, you know, who won out, as you were saying earlier. It was the landed people, meaning people with money, people with power. They had to be white. They were no women allowed and the like. You voted and you were enfranchised by the fact that you owned property, which meant you had money. So that same thing was going on in the South. Well, these guys are eventually, in their writings, some of them more strident than others, even are saying, well, we treated our darkies pretty well on the plantations, It's a romanticized vision of the past. The grass is greener. Growing up, we had no troubles. We forgot the bad stuff. We forgot the unpleasant stuff and we remember the good stuff. And that's what these intellectuals were doing. So they each wrote an essay which dovetail in interesting ways, some being, just almost Pollyanna, romantic, let's go back to the past, to, how can we compromise and so on. Have any of you ever heard of this book?
I've heard of literary guys in this bunch. I've heard of them as founders of the new criticism, which was the explication de text. Let's look at the text. And back to the question about language, and they were focusing on the language and how the language, what are the meanings, not just what's happening in the story, but the way that what language is used and how the language is used and how and I know Robert Penn Warren wrote a novel about there was a critique of romanticism, 19th century romanticism. It was, and reason I remember it is because I taught it, and when I was at the University of Kentucky, I was a teaching assistant. I taught freshman English, and we had every first semester, our second semester, we would teach the research paper, and we would use a case book, which is a bunch of essays around that took different positions on different topics. And this one, I remember, I forget the name of the book. I think it was called The Kentucky Tragedy, but it's based on a real life story about a murder that took place that a guy committed because of the influence of a woman and trying to satisfy her love or whatever. And it was sort of a critique of romanticism. It was not I'm surprised when you said that they had this romantic notion of the old South, and it's started looking at it nostalgically. I didn't, from what I know of Tate and John Ransom and I don't know, maybe I didn't read enough of them, but I didn't really pick that up from William Penn Warren. I didn't pick that up from what they were writing about. But that's interesting. I mean, that whole notion of the old South and the lost cause. Yeah.
Well, remember, this isn't a piece of literature. This is essays about what we ought to be doing and why we're right. And of course, deep down, the criticism later is, and rightly so, I think, is it was kind of a gone with the wind kind of approach. That is, what have we lost? What did we do wrong? We treated our folks well. We did our best. But the loss of power, the impotence of, suddenly it's blacks. And then one of them writes about how women they are part of the problem. Our own women are drawn toward, hey, the big city, let's go shopping, let's go, So some of these essays, even these guys are moaning about that. And then, of course, the blacks, the New South, the Jim Crow, the like, it's all mixed in there. And it sounds like that's what Heather was really talking about.
What was this group called?
It's called, and I'll give you more information about it at the end. I got the author and so on. In fact, I looked up to see there's used books available, and I'd say it's worth a read if you're really interested in looking back at the 30s. I remember with the background of the Depression coming in.
Yeah.
People
were questioning a lot about this.
The North is collapsing. Well, who how in the world did you fail to see that this was going to come? You know,
Yeah.
industrialism is going down.
Yeah.
Back to the land, back to the old ways,
Don't-
back to
yeah.
maintaining our power.
Jeffersonian
Woman folk,
agrarianism,
blacks back
democratic.
in line, all of that.
Don't you think
Subtle,
that
subtle or not so subtle? Yeah.
now, don't you think that one of the big issues here, and you see this being repeated in our own lifetimes with people like Phyllis Schlafly, who want to put out a work to justify, to rationalize a political position, that they want to create this fiction, and they draw from the cliches of disaffected people, that they pull things together and they create this myth. Stan, you were mentioning that the myth of the cowboy. I found that particularly engaging in the book, because that's what I grew up with in the 1950s and 60s, all these Western stories. And it hadn't occurred to me how many of them there were, and the narrative that was being pushed by that. And I didn't realize at the time that was being pushed by the folks who owned the networks,
Yeah.
who had interest in the Western section of the United States.
Yeah.
Essentially, what she says in this book, Dave, is that the South won the Civil War because they won the West.
Yeah, exactly.
There were lots
It's interesting
of
the way she talks about the melding of the myth of the cowboy and the Southern racism, you know, and the way I think what's his name? Oh God, sorry, the guy that the conservative that ran against Johnson. What's his name? The cowboy. Pardon?
Goldwater.
Goldwater. Yeah, yeah. Goldwater won like 5 or 6 Southern states.
Yeah. That was the time of the shift of the Democrats, the Dixiecrats, into the Republican Party, and that's, you know, they talk now about the fact that it was the Republicans who were against slavery, and it was Democrats.
Well, they were in the beginning,
but the sides have flipped since
it's
then.
interesting,
And but that's the thing that she points out is, you know, what does it mean that they won the war? Well, I can say something provocative here, perhaps, but I've said in the past that, you know, when you look at who won World War II, it was the Jews who won World War II. Oh, how can you say that? There were 6 million killed. Well, they got a country. Okay, they got a lot of influence in this country and in others. They won a lot. Now, they paid a hell of a lot for it. Okay, so the South won the Civil War. Well, they were destroyed. They were, you know, all this stuff, you know, plantations were destroyed. Yes, but they won the critical issue, which was the main cause of the Civil War, was the expansion westward. They wanted slavery in those states.
It was a struggle over the free states versus the slave state.
Right. Well, the South wanted these new big square states out west to be slave states. Well, they didn't get that, but they won something even more important. They won the political battle there, and we're still seeing it now. And I'm glad to see, you know, she points out the fact right now we're paying for that because South Dakota has 2 senators. Why the hell does South Dakota have 2 senators? Well, they went in and they divided that territory in half so they could have 4 senators instead of 2. It was a very deliberate move. They were very smart about it. And Mitch McConnell has built the foundation of this new political party on that fact. So, yeah, the South did win the Civil War. We were so stupid, we thought we won, and so we gave up on it. And what I was saying before about language ties into this as well. We think we've won the battle, and perhaps we've won the initial skirmish, but we've lost the war.
We lost the ideological war. We lost the war of ideas.
I'm not. Sure. I'm not sure I understand that premise. But what I'd like to ask is, how would you define the myth of the cowboy? Is it that if you see the movies, you know, cowboys are wonderful romantics, but they're also the good guys who go out and destroy the bad guys. Yeah. The Roy Rogers, the Tom Mixes, all the people, Hop hop along, all the
Right.
all the people we grew up with. Are those the cowboys that we're talking about? Is that the myth
Well,
of the
that's the
cowboy?
myth.
Or is it the reality of the people who really moved west, had nothing, and there were a lot of blacks among them, of course.
And
They
Hispanics.
lived hard, brutal lives almost in the process. There's nothing much to romanticize about being out there,
Read Cormac
hungry
McCarthy.
and dirty and making no money and,
Yeah.
you know, constantly
Yeah.
overheated or cold. Is that what the myth is?
No, the myth is people who are rugged individualists and they're self-sufficient and they don't need the government for anything. That's the myth of the cowboy.
Okay, now I got it.
But
That's
when you look into the details of how the West was established and how their economy was established, it was oligarchs. It was big
Sure.
ranchers, big cattlemen.
Mhm.
And when you read about I read the Wikipedia article about the Powder River Rebellion and the Powder River War in was it Missouri? No, Missouri. Was it Missouri? No, Wyoming. In Wyoming. I read the whole thing about that. And basically, you had these big cattlemen that wanted to. There were all these common people coming in because the federal government says, if you go west, we'll give you X number of acres, and if you can establish a homestead there, you can have it for free. And so all these people were coming in, and they were moving in on the land that the big ranchers had just taken for granted. You know, it wasn't their land; it was government land, and the government could do what they want with it. But the ranchers felt like, well, it's our land. We earned it. We own it. I mean, possession is 9/10 of the law, and so. That's where the range war started, where the big cattlemen were intimidating. I mean, they were burning the homes of settlers, and and what happened was, it's interesting. The way they justified it was they said that these little rancher guys, they said they were rustlers, they were cattle thieves, and basically, the it's a free range, so cows have calves, and who's the calf belong to? There's no brand on the calf, and so if a small operator tried to claim that, the big guys accused them of being rustlers.
Yeah,
cattle rustlers.
It's a very clear story there, Stan.
Yeah,
Now you've caught
so
me.
the myth. So it's a myth because what made big industrial ranching possible was the federal government paying for all these projects that made water available to them. Yeah. So they didn't do it on their own at all.
Well, a lot of them lost their land. I mean, in a way, they were like the American Indian or the natives who were.
Well, the big guys did
moved and pushed out and moved there and lost their places at times and so on. It was. But
so I think the way the oligarchs use that to control things is they say, well, if you should you want to be a cowboy, you want to be a rugged individualist, you want to be self-sufficient, you don't want to be taking handouts from the government. And so if the government comes in and says you got to do this or that, then they're taking away your freedom.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the government made corporate ranching possible, because of the land. Yes. They took all our tax money and they used it to develop water resources for the benefit of the big guys.
Right.
So that's the whole crazy thing.
No.
How would you define? She talks about the great American paradox, and she talks about. I mean, the end of the first chapter. I mean, she says all of this is based on a paradox that was here from the founding of our country.
Yeah. Well, the paradox, as she describes it, is.
How would you define that paradox?
Well, in order for some people to be free, some people need to not be free. Yeah. You can't have freedom for everyone. Yeah. So it's kind of baked into the Constitution. All men are created equal did not mean we might understand that to be today. It meant all men like us who are writing this document.
All men.
People, yeah, all of us guys are
If
created
you're
equal.
black, you're not fully
But,
human. And
I mean, yeah, you have to
female,
kind
you're
of
not a
put
man.
yourself back into the consciousness of someone at that time. I mean, slavery had been around forever. You know, it wasn't invented in the United States. We were one of the last ones to give it up, but it was around forever, and they didn't question it. They didn't say, you know, well, there's something wrong with doing this. They didn't question the fact that a man could own his wife and, you know, dictate what she did. It was just a given at the time. So the paradox was they preached freedom, but it was contingent upon maintaining what they called the mudsill. You know, you had to have
I remember that term.
the bottom of this group in order
The
for
mud cell that everything's the foundation and everything's
right. And you know, we're
Mud
guilty of
cells.
that. You know, we're guilty of that in another way today, I think, in that we have a society where you can buy exotic things. You know, I have a little thumb drive here. Well, where'd that come from? That came from China. Who made it? Well, somebody making $1 a day made it. So am I not enjoying freedom based on someone else's servitude? It's just the same thing. So that's the paradox. And she's trying, I think she skirts around the idea of the pyramidal structure in society as opposed to the collective. You know, that to me, that's at the heart of the paradox. But Paul, we've been kind of chatting here, and I haven't heard from you. So I don't
I was enjoying listening to this discussion.
Yeah.
Now, I've read enough of it. I haven't read the whole thing. I just didn't get to it.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned people like David Koch many times, and I understand what you're saying, but you know, David Koch, the time I see his name most often is on Nova, because he's the principal sponsor of television.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
this guy's got an idea that in order for us to have this, you know, David Attenborough talk to us about the environment or whatever, that somebody has to have a shitload of money in order to do it. So is that jiving with the idea of this paradox at Stanley?
It is. I mean, he gets his money from oil and gas and polluting the environment, and he uses that money to sponsor shows that talk about the danger of environmental pollution.
Yeah, that is exactly
It's like,
right.
Well, the benefit for him is everybody watching it thinks he's a good guy because he sponsored that show.
Yeah.
But I tend to be a little less critical of him because
I think he's.
I get some goodies from him, right?
I wonder if he's trying to salve his conscience. I wonder if deep down he knows he's fucking everyone over, and he's trying.
Yeah,
he's doing evil things.
What I'm saying though is you're asking before why people buy into it. It's because they get something out of it. They don't do it for nothing. So, Paul, I interrupted you.
Well, you know, I was thinking that your comment about Koch going for the stuff on TV is true, but the other thing is the fact that he has financed a lot of think tanks about this basic philosophy that he is promoting out there in the Federalist Society and all those people like that.
Libertarianism.
Yeah, and put it all together. And so that's, you know, he's been doing that for 60 years now. I mean, you know, they've really been hammering away at this same basic idea. So that, you know, everybody thinks, well, has to be, you know, this is how it is, right? Because we keep, I mean, they understood the whole business of propaganda right off the bat, you know, and spent the money on that particular thing. And so, you know, I think at it and I think, well, okay, all of this stuff is really familiar to me. It's just like, yeah, this is what I grew up with, and this is the sort of things that these people have been talking about for a very long time. But I don't know that there's a whole lot to be done to stop it. You know, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, let me bring you back around to the idea of language. There's not much that I could do to fight against someone, you know, these oligarchs who have a lot of cash and can, you know, finance campaigns. So what can I do? And I would contend that perhaps a more efficient use of language if we use our language more effectively and we think about our language more carefully, that might be some tool that we can use. And I was reading, one of the other things she mentions is Newt Gingrich, if you recall, back in, this was during the Clinton administration, he came out with something called language. I wrote it down here, a key mechanism of control. And what he did is he listed for all Republican candidates words that they should use and words that they should use to describe their opponents. And it was very, very interesting. And I wanted to share with you something I did today. I don't know if you caught, Stan, you didn't catch it, but this past Sunday, Dave, there was an article in the Courier Journal about the project for, now I can't show you that very well, but it's about the Beargrass Creek Restoration Project. I was asked to give a little talk today.
I get the paper, Michael, and I read that article.
Yeah. Well, I'm supporting that, and I did a little video on the my growing up on one of the branches of Beargrass Creek, and I went to talk to some people about it today.
Very good, by the way, if you guys haven't seen it.
Thank you. What I was telling them was, okay, we're a bunch of folks who don't have a lot of power, but we might be able to influence the language. So here's one example. I told them that when we're talking about environment, okay, consider the words you're using. Now, if I use this list of words, debase, debilitate, decimate, decrease, deface, defame, defile, deform, diminish, demolish, deplete, depredate, desecrate, destroy, devastate, and I add develop to that.
Wow.
I want to change the meaning that people have given to the word develop. And what I'm doing is saying it is a negative term, develop. There was something there and a developer tore it apart. And I think it's interesting that that word has evolved in the etymology of the word. It's come to mean the opposite of what it should. So when we say something is undeveloped, we think that's a good thing. Or we think, we think that's
a bad thing.
Undeveloped.
Yeah.
Well, undeveloped is a good thing. That's like, undestroyed. It's like we have something that is worth holding on to and somebody comes in and tears it apart. I'm trying to use that to influence people over things happening in my own neighborhood here. That if I can get them to think of the word in a negative sense and then have someone introduce themselves as a developer, well, you're one of those bad guys. Now that sounds pretty disingenuous, I guess, but that's the kind of battle we need to start waging. We got
that's a great example.
Around.
That is a great example.
Have you
another one? Let me offer one other that I've encountered in the neighborhood here. About 5 years ago, they decided to, instead of tearing down a cliffside across from the Brownsboro and Lower Brownsboro Road, across from the Kroger, they came up with a new term called road diet. So instead of 2 lanes north, 2 lanes south, they widened one lane north, 1 lane south, and then broadened the middle, and that's the turning lane. Mm-hmm. It can be a passing lane too, but they called it road diet. And see, it made sense, but it was they carefully chose the word to make it sound like, wow, you don't want to be a fat thing. You want to be you go on a diet and you can be a thin, right-sized thing. But guess what? Now, 4 years later, suddenly the groups that are dealing with this, I don't know where they came from it, but they've gotten rid of the term road diet. And now they're calling it all over the city, what they did out Lexington Road, Michael.
Yes.
Paul, that's a road diet, right? All the way from Grinstead, well, actually all the way to Payne Street on out, it's 1 lane, and turn lanes and so on, all the way out. And now they're calling that right sizing.
Right.
We've been doing wrong sizing. And if you think that the old way, now it's right sizing. How is that for a powerful,
Yeah.
loaded son of a bitch of a term?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
Develop
think,
another great one. Yeah. What does that mean?
yeah. Well, I think that's great. I think we've fallen into it in the past by using honest terminology, and we have to be, we have to be smarter than that. That we used defund the police recently. What a dumb thing to say. I would suggest enable the police, and then go on to define it as enable them to do something other than search and
Yes. Enable means
no, not
crazy
warrants.
help the police. Help the
Yeah,
police. Let's get
you
people
have to
in
say
there
it in a
for
positive way.
psychologists. Yeah.
We
Well-
use the term open borders.
And now I finally understand what you mean about language being
Yeah. Right.
being a tool to load your side of the case.
Exactly. We used
Or demonize the other side, which the Republicans are especially good at,
Yeah.
There's a
demonize,
the example that there was a book that came out a while back about the political language, and I think it was written by a conservative, and it wasn't Newt Gingrich, somebody else. But anyway, the thing that I remember is calling the inheritance tax the death tax.
The death tax, right?
Because that the implication is they're going to get you from, and when you're in the grave,
Right.
and
Okay.
it
Finally,
really
I
has nothing to
understand.
do with that. But the
Yeah.
death tax is much more evocative and gets people stirred up more than inheritance tax, which is kind of an abstraction.
Yeah. Well, they sometimes make a word, an ordinary word, become a negative. If you remember, Ronald Reagan said liberal, liberal, liberal. He's the first person I ever
Well,
heard.
today liberal is a
Well, he defined it as a
campaign
pejorative.
ads.
Yeah.
Liberal, radical, liberal, communist.
liberal means commie, liberal means radical.
Well, it didn't always
Doesn't
mean
mean
that.
liberal.
Democrats are
But
evil
more
now.
progressive as we
When Eisenhower was in office, the liberal consensus was a very real thing for both parties. The liberal,
Right.
there were liberal Republicans, but they managed to change it. That's my point on this. Is we have some bastards on the other side. It's the Newt Gingriches and it's the Mitch McConnells and the other folks who will take language and twist it in any way they can for their own power. And we tend to sit back and criticize them and say that doesn't make sense. Well, we know it doesn't, but the people in the middle of the political spectrum don't know that, and they're very affected by it. They're very much influenced by it. So I think we need to get smarter in the way we do that. We changed global warming to climate change fairly successful. Global warming was a terrible thing, a terrible term to use. You recall there was a congressman, some asshole, who took a snowball into Congress and said, "Look what I found outside. Global warming? That doesn't exist." Like,
I know.
you can't serve these things up to people. That basically most people in America are really stupid, and you have to deal with them as though they're stupid. And I know that sounds bad to say it, but I believe it's true. They're stupid. Stupid meaning they have information, but they choose not to accept it. There's a difference between being dumb, ignorant, and stupid. If you're dumb, you can't learn. If you're ignorant, you don't have the information. If you're stupid, you have the information, but you decide to ignore it. I would say people with regard to climate change are stupid. We've known what is happening. We've known about it for years and years. And yet now here we are, we've had the hottest years on record 5 years in a row, and we're still not doing anything about it. That's stupid. That's not ignorance. That's stupidity. And we're dealing with a lot of stupid people. And I'm sorry, but when you're dealing with them, you have to deal with them as stupid people. You can't treat them as equals intellectually. You have to change it. So
H.L. Mencken said, "Never underestimate the stupidity of the American voter."
Right.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've lost our right to a democracy. You can argue in many ways.
Yeah.
Well,
It's the greatest danger to democracy. People who don't care or don't want to think, or they, stupid, ignorant, or
well, this is all in order to form a more perfect union. This has always been a work in progress. And when you think about it, if you look at the history of the world, democracy is a relatively recent thing. And I think there's a real question now. Can it work?
Yep. Yep.
And here we are, liberal, right thinking people saying people are too stupid to vote, to know what's in their own good, and so that's what kind of democracy is that?
It doesn't give me.
What do we do? Give
joy.
people poll tests,
No, I think we have to push for education, but we have to do education in a direct way.
They're attacking education.
We were talking about the myth of the cowboy before.
Yeah.
Well, the myth of the cowboy was perpetrated by the media, by films and mostly by television. And now, what are some of the things we're fighting for? Gun control? Well, what is Hollywood doing with massacre movies? And the new cowboy is the Bruce Willis character shooting up everybody and, coming out a little bloodied, but still the hero. It's the same thing that John Wayne did years ago. And we're still continuing to accept it. We see these kids out, mass murder in schools and wonder, where did they ever get that idea? Well, they got it from the movies. They saw it, and also in computer programs and other things. But we tend to accept this idea that we can have these awful, terrible, violent things fed to people over and over again, and say, well, they'll all see through it. They won't. No, they won't. They won't see through it. They're not.
When I taught my film course, I based it a lot on the cultural criticism idea of the master narrative, and these are stories that cultures tell themselves over and over again in order to reinforce their values and to help them to feel to raise problems and have them solved in a way that is satisfying, understandable, etc. And one of the big things in movies is the revenge film.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm sure there's more recent ones, but some guy's family gets murdered by these thugs, and the police and the authorities are helpless, and so he goes out and takes matters into his own hands, wipes them all out, and he's walking tall.
Right.
He's the hero.
Yeah.
And
Another aspect of this, and where it seems to be going, I'm told, is by some younger people who are getting into, you could say, addicted to the new technology, high technology films. That is the virtual world stuff, which is just the next generation.
CGI,
computer generated. That's what's coming, and that's what's got the attention of young people, because they're, interesting stories, but they're really come down the same old theme. It's going to be bludgeoning. It's going to be back and forth. I mean, I wish I could think of one of the titles of them, but there's different sets of them. One film's made, and then a second one, and a third one.
It's the same. It is
Captain America in the future.
Right.
There
was an interesting thing. I've been working in computers for a long time, since the 70s, really. And when word processing was first made easily available to consumers, someone produced a series of books, and they were books that had plain covers. They were just called things like mystery, Western, sci-fi. That was the name of it. And what they did is they took the same story. It was an old cowboy story, and they went in and did a search and replace on the word. So sheriff became, grand overlord, and or became Star Trooper, or whatever the hell it was. And they would just, the same story, and they would replace all the words, and it read perfectly well. So you're right. It's the same story over and over again.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about that narrative that supports anything political. I think that's simply, greedy people realizing that, particularly males age to 30 are going to buy that shit. That's the same reason there are romance novels, because girls 12 to 30 buy that shit. So there's a certain amount of greed that goes into this that has no political component to it.
Yeah, what I see as one of the master narratives in movies that's reinforced is that violence is a justifiable means to an end.
Yeah.
And it can be a Western, it can be a crime story, it can be whatever. But you find the bad guys, you kill them, you save a lot of money in court cost, and you don't support those crooked lawyers. It's a nice, neat, problem solved,
Yeah.
and that's where you get this thing, people in Congress say, well, a good guy with a gun is what we need to offset the bad guys with guns.
Yeah.
Like all the good guys in Uvale who had guns and couldn't do shit with them. So anyway.
What I really fail to understand too is the whole world of new religion is why the ultra-right conservatives worship guns. It's everything that Jesus would not do. They seem to be addicted to doing, and who are the true Christians today? It's a bunch of agnostic, atheists, socialists, commies like us, I guess, and beyond. Isn't that ironic as hell? How do you come to terms with that kind of stuff? How do you understand it?
Well, it's interesting. I think I can shed a little light on that. I attended this online course through my church here, and it was taught by this guy at the Candler Foundry, which is the School of Theology at Emory University, and he did a thing on Christianity and violence, Christianity and guns and stuff. And he said it was the Civil War that equated violence and guns with moral rectitude. Slavery is the greatest evil in the world, and the only way we can destroy slavery is kill the people that support slavery. And so violence became a moral means to attaining a moral good, which is the end of slavery. Mm-hmm. And that stuck with me,
Dave,
all the stuff he said.
One of the things that Richardson mentions in the book is she talks about William H. Buckley. If you remember, Bill Buckley had a Sunday show. He was a conservative writer, founded magazine and so forth. Yeah. Well, the way she stated it was really more profound than I'd ever heard it before. That she said, essentially, Buckley was saying that the Enlightenment was a huge mistake. And you're asking, how can people reconcile this? Well, if you can imagine yourself in a pre-Enlightenment perspective where the church dominated and they dealt with people's feelings, their fears, their desires, that they didn't make rational arguments to them. They dealt with their emotions. And Buckley, in spite of his high intellect, was telling the Republicans, you need to deal with the emotional aspect. Don't try to reason, because at that time, Democrats and Republicans didn't disagree with each other that much on factual issues, But
the height of the church was in an oligarchic, hierarchic world.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's God, and there's the clergy, and then the lay people, on down the line. And so that fits a neat pattern for creating order and
their amazing relationship with the governments, meaning kings and emperors and the like. Mm-hmm. That's a fascinating blend of how they work together, or how sometimes they worked at odds.
Well, the church became a kingdom on earth, with the Pope and the cardinals, and they were fighting for political supremacy with the kings. When Charlemagne took the crown from the Pope and put it on his head, he was saying, I've got more power than you. And the Pope said, whoa, wait a minute.
Well,
I'm the one that says you have the divine, you've been chosen by God to be king, not you. Here we are.
Yeah. I think of English history too, as exemplified most prominently by Henry VIII, and how he founded the church, what he did and why. You can take it from there. It created the battle between the religious elements, leaders of the church, and the political, or the lay, well, not lay, but.
And Luther was trying to democratize religion. He's saying that the elite don't have to tell you what the Bible says. You can read the Bible yourself and decide for yourself. The Holy Spirit
Mhm.
works through the individual, not through the Pope.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so this
That's
was
what,
in general,
this is
it's
the
done very
elite,
well
the
with that.
oligarchs
well,
versus
that's
the
what
common people.
that's what the Puritans were saying in England at the time. And that's why when the Puritans came here, they brought that philosophy with them. And that was,
But they created a hierarchical thing where the ministers told you what meant to be righteous, and by God, if you didn't follow those rules,
well, you know, this,
you're in big trouble.
here comes the new boss, same as the old boss. They were leaving a place where they were a minority, and they went to a place where, you know, well, now I'm in the majority. Well, now I want to be the top guy. You know, I was the rebel before. Now I'm the prince. Dave, you were mentioning the fact that you're concerned about the loss of democracy. I'm concerned about the loss of the Enlightenment, where logic doesn't mean anything anymore.
Well,
We go back to worshiping the idols, and the idols are not going to be some, you know, statue in a cathedral or on a mountain someplace. It's going to be on the computer screen is where it is.
in the intellectual circles that
Wasn't Paul say?
Oh, I was wondering about, you know, focusing more on something current and applicable to us now. Are there various and sundry efforts on the part of people whose children have been shot and killed by the police, you know, walking down the street carrying signs, and that is a extremely common now technique whenever that happens, unfortunately a little too frequently. But nonetheless, this is the strategy that the people who have the most interest in seeing something cured at this point, that's the strategy they're using. And I'm curious as to what you think might be with that. Is it going to be an effective tool? Is it going to have to be something else, somebody with a lot of money, in order to be able to prove, you know, let's put this cop in jail for killing George Floyd?
it's a big question. It's a big question. I don't know. I don't know what the solution.
Really,
I'm trying to figure out the problem.
I'd say.
Yeah. He did get sentenced to 25 years today, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Who got sent? Oh, the guy in
Yeah. Floyd's killer, but
Guys in Uvalde.
yeah, I don't know whether demonstrations on the street do any good at all. I'm not convinced of that. I think it makes people in them feel good and people outside of them feel threatened. But
Isn't that what
it has no impact on the politicians.
We need to make people feel bad or feel good about something, and rather than do it in a logical way. You know, what's going to motivate? Is Brad Castleberry going out on a curb?
Well, I think some people would argue that all the demonstrations against the Vietnam War had some impact on its coming to a conclusion.
Yes.
I don't know that maybe but there's that argument out there that it made a difference.
I think it's certainly true. And then you add that the civil rights movement, open housing here.
Yeah, look at the civil. I mean, there were
eventually, but it takes a long time. And you can watch this whole reaction of the marching, particularly women, particularly young women, who are marching about the loss of abortion and what that's going to mean. And that'll be a good test, Paul, to see how, you know, and Mike, your contention that maybe demonstrating doesn't do any good. I think it's one of the tools that probably needs to happen and ought to happen, even though I think it aids in the development of responses and reactions and righting what's been wrong little by little, or finding new ways around it. I was in a group last night discussing, you know, the whole robe thing and how it's going to change, and mostly women in this discussion group. And I said, well, you know, maybe this thing will have a silver lining. It does have, I think, a silver lining, the loss of robe. And that's that, you know, there's going to be such a massive reaction of underground work, people driving people across, the mail order stuff. You know, it's been against U.S. postal rules to import drugs from Canada, pharmacies, and elsewhere, just because you happen to want to save 3/4 of what you're paying here. But it goes on. They've never been able to effectively stop it, and they don't. And I think that's what's going to happen with this thing. It's just going to be way too much way too many ways that you can go get the pills across borders. You could get them mailed in and underground. One of these guys is a psychiatrist. He said, "Do you know that right now he said, I understand that they are developing, they're on a rush to develop new and better abortion pills to serve the needs of. They'll be less harmful to the body. You'll have less chance of things going south if you take them, and the like. It's going to, this whole thing may generate movements that will expand things and make it, you know, it's not going to be as easy when it's legal.
The other side of that is the using technology and using vigilante justice to suppress people doing these things. And what if the Supreme Court decides that the fetus is legally is a person? Then we're all, you know, they can do anything they want to people.
They've come damn close to it, Stan, I'd say.
Pardon?
Right now. If you look at it, they've come.
Yeah, but they haven't said legally yet that the fetus is a person. But once they say that, then, you know, they get all the protections of law. The fetus gets all the protections of law that the women don't have.
But don't you think that's basically what's behind this? I mean, there's struggles between rules, and this is my body. I want to do what I want with it. But it's all about the unanswerable. It'll never be answered. We'll never know when life begins. It'll be an artificial decision.
No, I think it's simple. It begins at viability. If the fetus can live outside the womb, then
there's a lot of people don't.
If it can't, it's not.
Well, we're getting lost.
I'm sorry. I don't know what you people are confusing.
We're getting a little lost in the weeds on that argument, I think, because
I know, but there's similarities, Michael.
This isn't about abortion.
The abortion. It's all about abortion.
The abortion rule is not about abortion. It's about power.
Yes.
We do not want women to have equal standing. They are just as opposed to having women have equal standing as they are immigrants or black people or anyone else.
We're going back to the founding of the country and the Constitution.
Women
aren't mentioned in the Constitution.
So we're going to have Roe, and then we're going to get rid of any kind of affirmative action or anything that violates these so-called principles they have until we get back to the point where there are a few white men ruling everything. That's where they want to go. And Paul, to your point, the Koch brothers are emblematic of that. I don't think they're the chief folks involved, but they're doing that. This is the background struggle that pushes us to get waylaid into the weeds of equal rights. It's that power struggle of who is going to, are we a government of the people or are we not a government of the people? That's the essential issue. And they are saying, no, we are not a government of the people. Screw the people. We want the power, and we're going to do whatever we have to do to get the power. Now, all of the other discussions are means to the end. So if they picked up Roe versus Wade as a way to incorporate the Christian right into the Republican Party, they don't give a shit about abortion. They don't care one way or the other about abortion. But if that gets these people in, fine. Guns, oh, well, these folks over here really want guns, so we'll be on that. They don't care. They have no principles. They have no moral center. It's all about power. And once you understand the megalomania of it, you quit worrying about trying to have a rational discussion with them, and you just want to beat their ass.
So you don't think they want to do anything with the power? They just want the power.
Well, the power is the end in itself.
Because in an oligarchy, the power is used to enrich and preserve one's riches.
Well, I don't think there's any problem with David Koch realizing that he has all the money that he ever needs for the forever and ever.
But why would the Supreme Court, why would the conservative Supreme Court support these people getting more money? That's what I don't get. You know,
I think there's
a simple answer.
There's moral principle there. Most of them on that court are Catholic, the conservatives, right? And, you know, I wouldn't discount a belief in, you know, ultimately the right thing to do is be cautious about it. it is life, or it's pre-life, or it's life being formed. Is it a part of the mother? Yeah. But it is also not a part of the mother? Yeah. I think those Supreme Court justices are way more nuanced than just out there saying, well, we got the power, we got the control, we know what the conservatives want, and we're going to get it for them. I think that's too simplistic. I'm not saying that it's not a factor, and maybe it's a big factor, and maybe I'm wrong, but
well, another issue that's fundamental to this country is, to what extent do states give up their sovereignty to a central government? That's a whole federalism versus states' rights. That was from the very beginning. That was a big contention over whether or not to accept the Constitution. And this finding, I think legally, it's based on the notion that the federal government, there's nothing in the Constitution that says the federal government has the right. It belongs. Right. The decision of whether or not to allow abortion belongs to the states.
Well, they say anything not inherently articulated in the Constitution.
Yeah, so if it's not articulated in the Constitution, then the states. But the problem is, the anti-abortion people, they want to extend it beyond the states. They want to somehow or another use the states as a backdoor to get it. And Republicans are saying, if you could put us in control, we'll pass a national law that makes abortion a crime. And no states will be.
My only statement, Dave, and I'm not saying that these individuals don't have strong feelings or principles. What I'm saying is that's simply something that is being used by their controllers.
We got a phone call. Hang on.
Yeah, but anyway, we need to watch our time on watch.
Yeah, we're at. There was some comics punchline was, hey, I didn't know the Supreme Court was Catholic.
Well, up until the latest.
I didn't know you had to be Catholic to be on the Supreme Court.
Well, either Catholic or Jewish. There were, that's been for most of my lifetime. You either had to be a Catholic or a Jew. I like to think they were looking for the smarter people, but that's not true.
Just as an aside, there was a really interesting discussion on Ezra Klein's podcast from New York Times, and he was talking with this guy who was an expert on the Constitution, and he made this point, and it was a little hard to follow because I'm not a constitutional scholar, and these were like they were way up there on legal theory and stuff. But he said that the Constitution is there for people to use to create the kind of society they want to create. And he said the problem is the conservatives have, and this gets back to language, Michael, the conservatives have been able to figure out and articulate what kind of country they want, and they're going to use the Constitution to get it. Liberals have not been able to articulate the kind of country they want and how they can use the Constitution to get that country. Yeah. And I thought that was really, there's a lot more nuance and a lot more stuff that went on in that discussion, and it's very, it's pretty heady stuff.
Yeah, it's confusing on our side. Paul,
if you don't have anything better to do and you want to puzzle over this, it's Ezra Klein's podcast. What's the name of the podcast? Can't think of the name of the podcast now, but and the guy that's the host, the interviewee was a former dean of the law school at Stanford, and but he was good. He was very, they tried to cut through the legal stuff down to the basic stuff, but that's something I took away, was that the conservatives have been able to articulate the kind of country they want much more clearly and much more definitely than the liberals, and they're using the Constitution to achieve that, and the liberals aren't. So,
sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think we need to wind down. We've been
I've got somebody going to be calling, and I've got.
Yeah. Okay. For next time, if you have some specific portion of this that you'd like to discuss, please let me know. I'm going to go through and pull out a couple of topics again. I wanted to talk about language tonight. We did do that a little bit. I think that needs to be explored some more, but there are other ideas. And I guess ultimately I'd like to see how this applies to how what we're reading here, what we're talking about, applies to an effective strategy for battling back against the oligarchy.